You're listening to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I recorded this episode on unceded Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia, where Aboriginal peoples had been birthing at home, on country, for thousands of years prior to the British invasion. They are the original storytellers. If you want to learn more about me, the podcast, or how I can support you in achieving your home birth, be sure to check out my Instagram at birthingathome_a podcast. As a part of the Midwife Story series, today I chat with Anna. Anna is Swedish and currently lives in her midwitch cottage in Sweden, but to my delight, the day of this interview, I actually learnt that she studied and practiced midwifery in Australia. She shares her eclectic journey pre-birth work and how her passion for human rights is what has continued to motivate her in this work. Anna has so much knowledge, and it was truly wonderful to talk to her about midwifery, physiological birth, witches, birth culture, and the importance of knowledge sharing amongst women, but also birth workers. Anna also is the host of the Natural Birth podcast, and she has some great online offerings for which she has given me a code, which is my name, Elsie, E-L-S-I-E, to get 10% off her courses and offerings. Don't forget as well, if you would like to work with me, please check out my website, birthingathome.apodcast. Enjoy this episode, everybody. Welcome, Anna, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Thank you. So lovely to be here.
Thank you. And you're joining me all the way from Sweden, and I think it's 11 a.m. for you right now.
Yes.
And 7 p.m. for me here in Melbourne. But that's the power of social media, right? Like connecting. And then I thought that I would, go onto your website and like have a little look this afternoon. And then I saw you were on the Birthing Instincts podcast. And then when you said that you were in Australia, I was like, what the heck? Like, I did not know that. So Anna, do you want to give a bit of background to who you are? Obviously we know that you live in Sweden now, but where you've kind of been, I guess.
Yeah, well, doing a background is always so hard.
Yeah.
I'm turning 38. Where do you want to start? No, so yeah, I'm born and raised in Sweden. However, I've been quite nomadic my whole life. So since I was 17, I haven't lived anywhere more than a year.
Oh.
Until I arrived in Australia, arrived in Byron Bay actually. Not the first time, but the second time I arrived in Byron, I stayed, and I ended up staying for like 6 years or something. And I did become a midwife there as well. So yeah, my background story, I've always been very passionate about human rights, women's rights, minorities' rights, children's rights. I studied that actually in Stockholm at university when I was 20.
Yeah.
I've always been very also interested in nature medicine. So between the age of 18 and 20, I studied nature medicine, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, massage, all kinds of holistic therapies, herb medicine. And then I went out into the world at 21, started in Australia actually as a backpacker, a 21-year-old, fell in love with that country, kept on kind of coming back.
Yeah.
As I was traveling other places around the world. I mean, I've been a tourist guide in Venezuela. I've been working in a bar, when I was younger, in hospitality. I've been, a cleaner in motels. I've been waitressing, bartending, guiding, doing all kinds of stuff. And then I decided to become a massage therapist, a spa therapist, and working with tourism and health. So I did a kind of uni degree in that in Sweden when I was like 24, 25. I started an organic day spa for a year. I was a consultant around Sweden and then the world, doing yoga. I started doing women's circles. I trained in mystical dance, teacher training, and was very fascinated about ceremonies and rituals and women's work, and started doing that now maybe 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a yoga house in the north of Sweden for a year that I called House Harmony. And then I went out again on the road. I've been traveling a lot during these times, but then I went back to New Zealand when I was 28. and I was working there around at festivals and yoga studios and holding women's circles and yoga and workshops, and I got very much involved with understanding more and more about home birth, and I met these amazing, incredible women home birthing babies, and one became my friend, and she was very involved in the home birthing kind of movement in New Zealand. And I was so fascinated because New Zealand, obviously has, compared to Australia, as I know now, and a totally different maternity system. And so when I landed in Byron Bay when I then was, I think, 28 or 29, and because I was invited there to hold these women's kind of journeys, programs, retreats with another woman.
Yeah, wow.
And I was there for half a year doing that, and just absolutely fell in love with the community.
Yeah.
And I met some people that were midwives, and I learned that it was 25% home birth rate in Byron, and almost everyone else went to the birth center, also having natural physiological births.
Yeah.
And I'd always had, midwifery had always been in the back of my mind, but like the traditional midwife, right? That old school midwife, that, being with women, home birth, natural birthing. And in Sweden and most of the world, and most of Australia too, for that matter, it's very medicalized, as you would know, because you've gone through the system.
Yeah.
And so I never wanted to be a midwife in Sweden because I had to become a nurse first.
Yeah.
You have to do 3 years of nursing, then you have to work as a nurse for, I think, a year, and then you have to do 1.5 years or something of midwifery extras, right, on top of that. But then you're already so schooled into the midwife system, right?
Yeah, and
so that was
different worlds.
That was never something I wanted. But then when I landed in Byron, I was like, well, you know what? If I was, mind you, I thought it was more like New Zealand, so I was a bit naive. I didn't really do my research. I was like, there's an opportunity to, learn from the Byron midwives, and I could walk alongside them for 3 years. And of course, also I did placement at tertiary hospitals, and I was in the uni world, but I was naive, thinking that this really hippie, alternative, beautiful, natural place I'm going to be able to. And I did. And what I know now, having, worked and been out and, met so many midwives and around the world, whatever, I did get a unique training because I was there. So I did see, all of my personal continuity of care clients throughout my 3 years, almost all of them had natural physiological births, either at home or in the birth center, right? Or even in the hospital.
Yeah.
When I went to tertiary hospitals to work, I ended up attracting, or maybe because of my presence, what's the hen and the egg here? I don't know. But I almost never had any medicalization of my clients. So most were physiological, natural, even in hospital. When I was there on placement, people just coming in too. This happened to be like that for 3 years. I had to have extra time to experience cesareans because no one would have a cesarean with me. No one would have an emergency cesarean with me. I don't know what happened. It was just how it happened, right? And the same with like epidurals and all of that. So I had very little medicalization even during my tertiary kind of hospital experiences and placements. So I had this very unique 3 years of just so much normal and natural.
Yeah.
In my graduate year, I ended up spending up in Elsie Beach with Sundays at a little country hospital that, I don't know, I know you stopped being a student maybe before you went to placement, or I mean graduate.
Finished it.
Yeah. So my graduate year, you're not supposed to, as a graduate, be left alone. Well, day 2. Like literally being in a country hospital. That the rules go out the window. You have no mentoring. You have no one. Like I had no one. I would have night shifts. I would be there half of my shifts by myself. There was no other midwife, no other manager. It was me. And then I had to call if I needed extra help. But I could have a floor of like, postpartum mamas, someone being induced, someone in, early labor, someone coming in labor, and it was supposed to be low risk, but so much was not. So that was a initiation by fire that year. Very unsafe, to be honest, how they practice. I think they've changed now because I put up such a... I'm not a quiet person, as you might or might not know. I will speak up when I think something is wrong. And I did a lot, and it made me unpopular for sure. But after that year, I never went back to the hospital. I decided that, this is definitely, I knew from the beginning, literally the first week of starting uni, I cried. And I think I cried every week during my 4 years.
Yeah.
Because
I
of the
understand.
trauma, the violent system, and I remember I got the question maybe half year into my training, like, how's it going? And I just, I was, those 4 years of my life were hard because I had to, somehow I knew there was a higher purpose for me going through this hell, because sometimes it was really hell.
Yeah.
So much traumatic because of what I saw in the system. Not ever a birth in itself, like, that is, to me, is not traumatic.
No.
It is the obstetric violence I witnessed. It is the system that is violent. It is that me as a student and also as a graduate midwife, my allegiance had to be with the institution. I could not be the full midwife that I wanted to be for women, because I'm employed by an institution that tells me I had to follow these policies and guidelines, because if something did not go the way it should go, then I would have been in the wrong. Even though the policies and guidelines most likely would cause trauma to the woman, I had to do those things. Of course, I again was a little rebel. I was known as the bar and hippie at my graduate year, and that I wasn't towing the line, but in saying that, you still have to. You can't be in the system and fully be woman-centered.
Yeah, and that's the real part of it. And I guess that's many reasons why I didn't finish, because I was like, I don't want to go do a grad year. I don't want to go to the hospital. If it had been an option to go straight into, working with private practice midwives, but do more physiological, like have a more physiological approach and mindset, maybe it would have been different. But also, like, midwifery in Australia is just it's just, even the home birth midwives are witch hunted. I guess going all the way back, like, so you started doing all of these natural therapy kind of things and the women's circles and whatnot in your initiation into womanhood and whatnot. Like, was that stuff on your radar, or like how is it in Sweden? Like, in terms of like girls' education, is it similar to what Australia probably is, in that, like, we don't really get anything? Or like, what was your experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. I have always been, how every family has a black sheep or whatever you want to say. I was always the weird one, right? From very early on, I was the sensitive kid. I was too sensitive. Everyone thought I was too sensitive.
Yeah, wow.
Right, and so when I look back at my childhood, I had always had this strong rights pathos. Like, I remember being a 7-year-old and this boy was bullied in the schoolyard, and I was quite bullied on and off, like, throughout my school years, right, being so different. Well, speaking truth and just not towing the line as always. But as a 7-year-old, I saw that these boys bullying him, several boys. I placed my body in front of his and said, don't do that, like, stop it. So, and now I can think back, whoa, I was cool, but that was not like, so I didn't have this thought process of, I'm going to put myself into trouble. Reflecting on that, I just acted. So I would do those things, like, as a very young child. And as I think 14-year-old, or maybe younger, 13, I discovered what the church had done to women. The witch trials. Very early, I discovered that somehow through social science, like through history, whatever. Somehow that came up and I learned about it. And there was this strong, like, remembrance in my body as a very young girl of that was me. Like, I've experienced that. I feel that's that affected me so deeply. It like catapulted me into some sort of, like, rage about the world and about what women and children experience because of the world we have. And I remember somehow then my dad told me as a 13, 14-year-old, he's like, I know a witch. He told me.
Brilliant.
My parents are like the straightest. And I was so shocked. I was like, what? And so, yes. And so he got in contact with her and said, hey, my daughter is like, needs some guidance.
Yeah, from a witch.
From a witch. Yeah, she called herself, a witch and a shaman. And she was from the north, a shamanic woman from the north. And I got to sit in circle with her and like 50-year-old women, 40-year-old women. I was 13. Whoa. And she taught me, things. And since then, that just became my normal. I was hanging out with much older women than me. I learned that my sensitivity and intuition was not something that was wrong, but was a superpower. Yeah. And how to harness that and how to strengthen that within myself. And then, on that path it was. So it's always been for me the natural world, natural healing, and then right, like human rights, what is right and wrong, being very strong, like advocating for people, for myself, for what I believe is truth. Like that has been throughout whatever I've done, right? Yeah. So I also went into studying with the city mission. So I was very involved with homeless people and went traveling to other countries where there were still orphanages, which is not something we have in Sweden anymore, and women who trafficked. Yeah. So I was very immersed with those things as well as a young child. And
wow.
Yes, I can't even remember your question.
That's so but that wow, that's so special that you got to sit in circle and connect with women that had this still connection to themselves and that sort of spiritualness, because pretty much that's in mainstream society. That's I mean, if I said, if I can just imagine I go to work tomorrow and say, I spoke to a witch yesterday, they would be like, what are you talking about? You're mad. It's just not, it's not part of, at least, the mainstream world anymore, that connection. And in these conversations and in this kind of community, do you remember there being kind of discussion about birth and within that, birthing at home and whatnot?
Not as a child, no. I can just remember, I've never been, believe it or not, a baby person. You know how some people see a baby and oh my God, a baby. Yeah. I'm like that with dogs. If I see a dog, I'm like, oh my God, look at the dog. I need to pet the dog. Yeah. But never with babies. And still, I'm not like that with babies. Yeah. Even though I've been a midwife for so many years and all of that, but pregnancy. Yeah. The idea of pregnancy has always fascinated me, and just, I think, how I entered midwifery was for women. Yeah. Now, definitely for the babies too. And it's so important how the babies enter this world, for sure. But from where I came from was for women, women's strength, power. It's like the ultimate testament to how powerful we are as women is to birth new life. It's a woman's superpower. And that's how I came into midwifery, and that, I think, is where I'm coming from. Yeah, sure. I've been a kind of, feminine embodiment coach, or whatever you want to call it, for years. And that's where I came from, sitting with women, looking at their first rite of passage. How was their first menarche? How did that inform them about the woman that, she was supposed to be in this world, what it is to be a woman? Yeah. Looking at her relationship to sexuality, which I would say during all my years, say 15 years of working with women in this kind of space of her embodiment of her body, self-love, body love, sexuality, her relationship to her, vulva, vagina, yoni, her, menarche, all of that. 99% of women do not have a healthy relationship with either of them, all of them. It's just, and even the woman you think would don't. There's just such a disconnect to being woman, being cyclic, and our sexuality. You know, we're so the world tells us that sexuality is from a very kind of toxic, immature, masculine way of like a rabbit or something, which is not. It's so far from feminine sexuality you can come, and that's why so many women don't have orgasms, have never had an orgasm, are so disconnected to their body. There's just it's body shame, it's all the things. So coming from all of that, that's where I came from coming into midwifery, you know, wanting to continue this work of like, how can women really understand their power as women through birth, and not, which I then witnessed so much in the system, being freaking broken, even more than the world already does for women, right? But even more so in birth, like failing to progress, the biggest reason why, you know, what's happened in medical institutions, being cut open for so many wrong reasons, all of these things, right?
Yeah. And taking that power and saying, we saved you. And so then the women don't even know, like they don't know that the power of that whole process. And certainly it reminded me of a recent episode I recorded with someone about perineal tearing, and she had a free birth, and she was saying, oh, like, thank God that, or not, you know, thank God, but like I had been, you know, she was saying, I had been looking at my vagina and I knew what my vagina looked like. So after I had my free birth, I looked at my vagina and I was like, oh, well, like I can tell that perhaps there's a tear here that, you know, is a bit more than what I might be able to heal naturally at home. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't looked at my vagina. Like, you know, that connection, it's just like, there's so, it's, but certainly, again, you're not encouraged to do that because, like, why would you be looking at your vagina? Like, are you a rabbit? Like, like it's just, like so many thoughts and words and frustrations, and but that's magical. So just pausing here to thank the May sponsor for the podcast, Let's Talk Birth, and share a discount code with you all. At Let's Talk Birth, they're dedicated to providing unwavering support to women as they prepare for childbirth and beyond. You can discover tailored doula support, curated products, and expert guidance from endorsed midwives and certified lactation consultants, all in one convenient place. Join their community and experience a space of knowledge, compassion, and shared experiences as you navigate your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. We hold the mother while she holds the baby. For an exclusive 15% off this May, use the code ELSIE15, that's ELSIE15 at checkout. You can visit letstalkbirth.au to see all of their amazing products. I recently got the Bink glass water bottle and I love it, but they have amazing carriers and very, very cool brands in store. So make sure you check it out. And thank you again so much, Let's Talk Birth, for supporting the podcast. Okay, now we get on with the rest of the episode. After you finished your grad year in the country hospital, did you where did you go from there? Did you go back to Byron Bay?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went back to Byron. I went back to Byron when COVID happened.
Oh, no.
Well, just before, actually, that's wrong, but before, yes. So I went back to Sweden for a little while to visit my family, and then I came back. So I did home birth. And I started what was then called the spiritual midwife. Yeah. Now I'm called the spiritual midwitch. Yeah. And because I did a whole journey. You know, during my grad year, I had this very strong intuition telling me I needed to I needed to become self-sufficient. I needed to go out in the countryside and like grow my own food and just become self-sufficient. I had this very strong urge. And I was in this beautiful apartment overlooking the ocean in the Whitsundays. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
But I just had this strong just feeling. I didn't know where it came from. And the year after, COVID happened and then the world changed. And so I was like, oh, that's where it came from.
Yeah.
And so I had a very strong feeling like that. And then I went back to Australia from Sweden literally just a month or two before, the lockdowns kind of happened in March. Come back, I think, end of January or something like that.
Yeah.
And my plan was to start educating more about physiological natural birth and try to prevent all this trauma I was seeing in the hospital, trying to help women optimize their chances of having a natural birth outside or inside the system. So that's where the natural birth course, my signature course, was born.
Yeah, wow.
I actually did that at home in my brother's kitchen in Sweden, that course.
Wow.
Recorded it there between 2019 and 2020, and then went back to Australia. And then I also created the nursing postpartum course because, of course, if women are bad at kind of preparing properly for their birth, they're even worse when it comes to preparing for their postpartum. Like so many women will prepare up to their teeth for having a home birth, a free birth, a natural birth, whatever. And then very, very extreme. Of those, I would say 5% of those actually prepare properly for a postpartum. So anyways, that's where that was birthed a few months later after that.
Yeah.
And I attended home births in Byron. And then I started traveling up and down because I'd make so much connections in Queensland as well. So I was traveling with both my temple works and my women's circles, and also started to coach around the world women who wanted to have natural physiological births in all birth settings, and also birth trauma, like starting to help women understand why their birth unfolded the way they that did, and for women to actually have someone really truly compassionate listening to their story when they had a traumatic experience, and also being able as a midwife to read their notes and go, what, most of this trauma that I would say 99% of women coming to me with a birth trauma healing session, it is the system that created that trauma. It's because of all the interventions and the things that did not help her uphold the physiology. That's what made it traumatic. She wasn't heard, so much obstetric violence. So that's what I started doing. And then I started mentoring women who wanted to become facilitators in holding space for women, generally, like all rites of passages, not just birth, and women's circles and this stuff. And then I thought, what the heck? It's been 1.5 years in 2021. They still haven't opened the borders. My dad had cancer, and there were so many different reasons that I went, I think it's time for me to go back to Sweden for a while. And I don't know for how long, but I felt like it was time. So that brought me back to Sweden in 2021. Then I was back again in Australia and traveled a bit more. But now, last year in 2023, in May, I decided to come back and finally buy my piece of land, my little midwitch cottage.
Wow.
And now I'm growing my own food, and I'm working towards self-sustaining, as much as I can. But, I have my own fire stove and fireplace and my own water and my land where I'm growing stuff in my greenhouse, and I'm getting chickens. And so I'm on my way, having that strong intuition in 2019. It only took me 4 years, but here I am.
That's incredible.
In Sweden, which I did not think. But again, the pandemic just turned the whole, world upside down, and values changed. And all of a sudden, it was time to return to my homeland.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm at. Yeah.
And I listened to a bit of your interview on the Birthing Instincts podcast later this afternoon, and it was about the term midwife. Do you want to give a bit of an explanation for my listeners about, midwife, midwitch, why the change, especially because you did call yourself the spiritual midwife previously?
Yes, and I have such I love the word midwife, and I really do feel that the institutions and powers to be really have stolen that word. So in different countries around the world, and because I'm international when I work, so I haven't told you yet, but I started also 2023, so last year, the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship. So I now mentor and educate women who want to work as sacred spaceholders and birth advocates for women, a much deeper, broader, more holistic, very much, everything you should learn in midwifery school, except the medicalization and, medical skills. I teach my, beyond the doula training kind of women.
Yeah.
And so because I'm international and I coach women from all the world, and I became a midwife in Australia, and in Australia, and in also other places around the world, not all, I now am not registered. I'm a midwife, but I'm not registered. And because I'm not registered here in Sweden, and I'm no longer registered in Australia, I decided to let that registration go. I cannot legally call myself a midwife. So that's why I changed my name to Midwitch.
Yeah.
So it's kind of to protect myself, because there's, as you kind of mentioned, there is a witch hunt on midwives, especially if you're not towing the line being an obstetric nurse. Yeah. Because to be honest, if you work in the system, you're an obstetric nurse, you're not a midwife.
Yeah.
It's, you're constantly having to, ask daddy doctor for permission for everything, and everything becomes medicalized, so very little is actually in the scope of midwife, because midwife is natural birth. It's like is the guardian of the physiological, the normal, and really that only really happens at home, and maybe in birth centers, depending on the birth center, and if it's connected to a hospital, what kind of midwives are there. But so they've stolen the word. I would say, to summarize what I'm trying to say, the institutions have stolen it. Different countries have criminalized you calling yourself that, midwife, if you're not registered with a board that governs you, controls you, can punish you. Yeah. And very much do. Yeah. As you just said, so many midwives, most midwives will be reported in Australia to APRA, other,
especially
organizations around.
Midwives.
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, and so it's a way to protect myself, and then also to claim the word witch, because I don't generally go around calling myself a witch, but a lot of people frown at that word, thinks about like a scary woman that wants evil in the world, and that is the image that actually the patriarchy and the church very much has branded into our psyche, and it's still so very active, in our modern world. And it's not true. Witch was someone who healed people. Midwife also. Midwife was the first to burn in the witch trials. The midwives were the first to be burned because they were the last women in society that had power over something, which was not power or something. If you talk to a midwife, they don't have power or anything. But from looking from a masculine point of view, from the church and so on, they did not have control over women at the birth place, right? That was midwives, so they had some sort of power, and so they were the first to burn. Midwives, they would attend both births, but also death. They would be kind of the wise woman of the village. The witch, the midwife, same thing. So
and that demands respect as well. And in a community sense, like if you're respecting the the midwife down the road, well, you can't really also pay the same respect and same allegiance to the patriarchal figure, right? So it's
because the midwife would heal, and whoever was the figure at that time would kill. Their practices wasn't healing, right? And so back in the day too, it was an oral tradition, because obviously midwives weren't educated, they couldn't write, so nothing almost has been kept in writing. So it's all the men, right, that started writing stuff from their point of view, and barber surgeons and all these scary men who did things to women, and took over. And obstetrics is based on practicing on slaves and poor women, truly. The men did to kind of learn. And there's a shift around 1900s, and all of a sudden the rich would have this barber surgeon present, and then all women wanted that, and it became a status symbol to just have him there, and they slowly took over. And then, we have the scary stories about twilight sleep and women being drugged and not remembering and thinking that was the gold standard and all women should have that. But then, finding out the truth about that. Oh, there's so much horrific story about how the obstetric world took over. And it's very much still based on that. In our, even though it's just a different form now, but the same kind of attitudes remain, that women's bodies are parts, they're supposed to work in one way, and that is not true. Women are not the same at all. We're all very unique.
I couldn't help it to remember that I'm pretty sure the word hysterectomy comes from like hysteria and like just but you don't learn that at school. Like no one's teaching, like you, in so many situations, like you accidentally kind of come across things. Even the way that I came across, midwifery, like I went to university to deliver babies. And imagine my shock when you find out, actually the woman's delivering the babies and you're just meant to sit on your hands. But my whole entire world changed. And this whole, the past 10 years has, like, I wouldn't be who I am now without having begun that journey. So even though, I've talked about it before that I didn't, finish, I did the 3 years of midwifery and nursing and just finished my nursing in the end. But like all of that knowledge and everything that I have, I learned then triggered a response to now. And, that's why I chose 2 home births. And that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing and sharing, stories, because I totally acknowledge and I'm desperate to discover and relearn all of this lost knowledge that it was an oral tradition. We weren't writing these things down. So all of the variation in birth, the hospital medical system has it in their textbooks that 1 + 1 = 2, but like that's not what birth is. No. It's not an equation. It's not a piece of machinery on a conveyor belt. It's power. It's magic. Birth is magic. And
all these variations of normal you never see in hospital because they never allow it because it's pathologized. So most women are pathologized. Most women walking into a hospital will be, if they're not induced, they're augmentated, right? They will be breaking their waters. They will be giving them syntocinon. They will be doing something to that woman. Most women will get something, like very few. I saw that you learned from Ria Dempsey. I love how she says, that it's physiological birth is, almost extinct, which it's true. It's scary, but it's true. And that's why this podcast that you have, what I'm doing, like this is so important that we are now telling these stories for women to really reprogram their subconscious minds in understanding and believing in just their natural God-given ability to birth. Like most women, given the right circumstances, can and should be able to birth fully on her own. Very few need help. Very few. But today we are programmed that it's life and death, and you need the hospital, and people say that instantly when you say if you're going to have a home birth, but what if something happens? It most likely won't at home. That's the thing. I say the opposite. Are you going to go to hospital? Oh my God. What if something happens? Because there it definitely has such a high chance of happening. Something's going to happen to derail your desire of having a natural birth.
Absolutely. And so like in terms of home birth and I guess in Australia, word on the street is that free birth, the canary in the coal mine kind of thing, is on the rise. And home births hopefully are on the rise in Australia despite the major systemic issues. In Sweden, is it similar? Like, what's briefly, are you able to give a bit of,
Yeah. So currently it's changing because of just massive. So when I returned, I think 2021, a third of the midwives left that year. Like, there's been massive protest, outcries to just, because it's all over the world, that is happening all over the world. Midwives are having enough, and the young midwives coming out are just absolutely indoctrinated into being obstetric nurses, because all the old midwives, all the ones with experience, all the ones that trust birth still leave because they're just so appalled of what's happening, all the unevidence-based practices like inducing women at 39 weeks now, or, all these things that are happening that are just causing absolute trauma to women and babies. Midwives can't stand it. True midwives can't stand it, and they're walking. So that happened, and there's, massive outcries and in the media and stuff like this. And free birth definitely has gotten its place all over the world now. I think all countries report about this, women choosing this. And of course, usually not from a good angle, of course, but it's at least being noticed because it is more and more happening, right?
Yeah.
And, a lot of times it's just come together, all home birth and free birth the same, which is definitely not the same.
No.
But how it is here, so Sweden is very unique that so far it's been almost one of the only countries that women have no choices here, publicly funded choices. There's one choice, and that is tertiary hospital.
Yeah, wow.
If you want to have a home birth, you have to pay for it yourself.
Yeah.
You used to be able to have a home birth for publicly funded means up until 2010. And then something happened, again, a witch hunt of midwives, and someone else got in power. You know how, this happens. It's always trying to not give women the choice and the power. And now that's kind of happening again. So it's very curious.
Yeah.
I found my little cottage in one of the most conservative regions in Sweden, where I found my cottage is only half an hour away from massive big Viking graves and the epicenter, the spiritual center of Sweden, Scandinavia, actually, in the Viking times. And from before and after. Now, of course, when Christianity came to Sweden, the church took over this sacred spaces. That was this was where all the tribes would gather, all the peoples would gather every year for ceremonies, celebrations, all of these things. Well, the church took over, so now there's this place where most churches are. Right? Because it's the spiritual center of Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So I'm only half an hour away from this.
Yeah.
And this is also where the university hospital is, and where they are most against home births in the whole of Sweden.
Wow.
Like the doctors, everyone there, home births is like witchcraft.
Yeah.
But I moved here for some reason. I don't know why. It wasn't a choice to move there for that at all. It just happened to be I found my dream house there. Dream cottage. And about a month after I moved there, I get the news that there's this politician that is bringing in publicly funded birth centers and home birth in this region.
Wow.
That is the most against this. That is the most very patriarchal, conservative, against this, right? So this is very curious. And the curious that I moved there at the same time. So I'm actually going to have lunch with her next week.
Wow.
And hopefully this will spread around Sweden. And, I'm also involved in a home birth midwives network that we are working towards, obviously strengthening this in Sweden and changing what's currently a very medicalized, highly technocratic model where midwives are... So midwives in Sweden has even a bigger scope of medicalization than Australia. So they can do forceps, vacuum. They have much more of that. There's somewhere in between a midwife and a doctor in Sweden. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's a different practice.
Yeah.
We're bringing in more and more in Sweden continuity of care, but that doesn't exist at all. It's very much this year that's being talked about and brought in slowly into different places. It's changing. Water birth was banned for a long time because one baby died, which has nothing to do with water births. It was banned for ages. Now it's coming back. So it is happening, but it's so very highly controlled by the medical society by the obstetricians and gynecologists that never ever see a natural birth. They are ruling still over midwives and midwifery everywhere around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, in Victoria this year, hopefully by the end of the year, there'll be 5 publicly funded home birth programs. And so there's 3 new ones this year. And I'm doing a lot of advocacy work. Like I kind of started Home Birth Victoria after finding out that it had sort of died during COVID, any sort of, organization, like formal organization of people in the home birth community. And we have like 500 members in that. It's only a Facebook and Instagram group at the moment. But we have 500 people in that Facebook group already just after a couple of months. And we have multiple meetups across the state. But like the publicly funded home birth, it's so tricky because for some women, it's going to make home birth and, the best chance of having a physiological birth more accessible. But for example, for me, I have big babies. My first baby was 4.5 kilos. My second baby was 4.6 kilos. So in any of those programs, I am not eligible because that's part of the exclusion criteria. They, say, we have the home birth program, which is great, but like how many women are low risk enough and can remain low risk enough to actually get the chance to even, be at home in labor. And then I believe the transfer rates are around 35% for publicly funded home birth programs. And that's not like an accurate statistic to be giving because they're so restrictive anyway. Like they're going to transfer for things that, midwives that are trained in home birth, and that's the physiological birth and all of the variations, they wouldn't transfer for the exact same reason. So it's just, it's so frustrating because you want to be grateful that, okay, finally, like maybe something's happening. But at the same time, it's like, oh, but this is still not really right. Like,
yes, it's because still when it's publicly funded, it's still dictated, those criteria are dictated by the obstetricians and gynecologists that again has no business in midwifery.
Yeah.
No business in midwifery.
Yeah.
But still they do because still society are valuing them higher than the knowledge of midwives.
Yeah.
Even though they're putting their nose in business they have no idea about. They've never seen a natural physiological birth. None of them have.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't learn about it. And that's not the type of person that I would want to be at my birth, right? Like it's chaos, but we persist and we're both here. And you're obviously doing amazing work, and to be working with women all over the world, like that's incredible. Is that what takes up most of your time these days?
Yes, it does. So I've really found my passion.
Yeah.
So I've always been a natural kind of educator. I don't know if you know about human design. Have you ever heard about human design?
Sort of.
Yeah. So in human design, I am a hermit leader / teacher. That's my design at birth. Yeah. And it's so true. I love being tucked away in the countryside in my little midwitch cottage, growing my food, being in the garden, and then I pop online and I have the world to teach for, and I freaking love it. Yeah. So yes, in my mentorship, I have women from Australia, all the way, South Africa, Europe, the US, Canada, South America. It's just absolutely fabulous. I love it, and it's so needed. For me, I got asked to start a doula training. That's where it came from. I just got asked several times. I had 3 people in 1 month I never mentioned it. I haven't, that I just asked, do you teach people? Do you teach people how to hold sacred space for birth? And I was like, no, but, it seems to be a thing that people want. So that's how I came about creating it last year. Yeah. And I've now, had 2 cohorts. I'm currently teaching the second cohort, and I'm starting a third one now in end of August 2024. And it's an absolute delight and pleasure to spread, to just plant these birth workers around the world that really understand sacred space holding in birth, because it's one thing to understand physiology and know all the things, like a midwife, or I have midwives in my cohort. I have doulas that have already been working 10 years, and I have total newbies who've never, never had a birth, worked in an office, and I have mamas who've had a natural birth. I have all kinds of women from all walks of life that are just passionate about birth, right? A natural physiological birth, and the spiritual aspect of seeing it as a rite of passage. That's kind of what draws them all to my mentorship.
Yeah.
But even those, even midwives and doulas who worked for a very long time find so much value in this mentorship, because it teaches something that just is not taught anywhere. It's not taught in midwifery school. It's not taught in doula trainings, at least not most, traditional ones.
Yeah.
What is it like to really hold sacred space, and how is your presence really affecting birth? Like I said, in my training, 3 years, I barely had anything medicalized happen when I was there. Why? Yeah. Maybe it's just that I attracted that, or maybe it was the presence that I brought to the space, right? Yeah. And I think it's a combination of that. It really matters. Your nervous system, what you bring into the space, your own relationship to your own body, your sexuality, your own vulva, looking at your vagina. We go through, a deep, deep dive for 2 months in my mentorship. About looking at your rite of passages. If you had your own births, what are you bringing in as a birth worker into the birth space? You need to really be aware of that. Yeah. Being able to calm your mind, this, meditative state of being the ocean of awareness. So I bring so much knowledge about that. And that really comes from, being a yoga teacher, holding women's spaces for so long beforehand, being a coach for so long before being a midwife, and how that really also affected my practice to such great outcomes that I had with women. I'm now teaching others how to help their clients have similar, outcomes, because it matters. It matters who you have at your birth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can choose your birthplace and it might be home, but if the space isn't right, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And, I've experienced that firsthand. I thought, at uni, I learned so much about home birth because I was just lucky and I had, the right tutors and the right lecturers. But going into my first birth, I just thought, oh, well, I've planned a home birth. I'm having a home birth. Cool. But actually now I can reflect so much and I'm like, no, the space, the things, I had a home birth, but it wasn't exactly how I had imagined it might, well, not even imagined, but, it didn't go the way that I had hoped. And I think I know a lot of that is because the space, I hadn't given thought to, who I was inviting, the energies that they were bringing, the backgrounds that they were bringing, their values. And I mean, most women that are pregnant, and, are having babies don't, haven't received any sort of knowledge about any of this. So that's, amazing that it feels like you've got little witches or little soldiers, all over the world. And one day we'll take back our power.
That's what I feel. I love, that this is attracting women from all over the world. It's amazing. And it's so rich because we're all teaching each other about the systems in different countries. As well, and there's international sisterhoods being formed, which is also so amazing. It's a very deep kind of self-development program in its, in becoming a sacred birth worker, you're also really understanding yourself deeply and forming really solid relationships, because that's something that's missing, I feel, in the birth world too. You know, during uni, I don't know if you had, I think you did probably, but we would have debriefing circles with our cohort or with maybe our peers with a midwife, right? And we got to debrief birth experiences. And then that doesn't really continue in practice.
No.
Now I, you know, would gather with some of the home birth midwives in Byron, you know, maybe 2-3 times a year we would do like continuous development, you know, maybe baby recess or something. And we would chat and share experiences, learn from each other in a safe environment. And that's a big part of this mentorship. You know, every month we meet the whole school and everyone gets to share their birth they've attended, share about clients, get, you know, feedback, you know, me as a mentor helping them, but also from the cohort, learning from each other's experiences. That is richness. That is invaluable as a birth worker. Yeah. We need those spaces to debrief safely and confidentially, obviously, about our experiences and sometimes cry, sometimes laugh and learn from each other.
Yeah. I feel just another, you know, comment on that is that I feel that it's the divide sort of creates a tension and competition, and so open discussions and sharing and, you know, this reflection isn't, you know, supported in pretty much in healthcare in general, but like you know, in the midwifery birth world, because like there's such a fear of risk and of, you know, adverse outcomes, and, you know, disclosing that maybe you've had an adverse outcome, you know, that can feel like, I imagine, like quite risky because, like, I mean, here in Australia,
it could be reported.
Like, APRA will be knocking on your door. So that's really beautiful because that's how we learn. That's how we pass it on.
That is the woman's way. That is the midwife's way. Yeah. That's what midwives have done throughout the ages. We've been, learning by watching and going alongside other midwives. That's how midwives were created back in the day. It wasn't at uni. That's again. And so much, as you know, that we learned at uni was bullshit. Yeah. Was totally unnecessary. So many things. Yeah. That we spend money and time on just to get that piece of paper that then chained us to the institutions. Yeah. I mean, it's, oof.
Yeah. Oof.
And that's why people that actually, a lot of the women coming to my mentorship are ones who have been nosing at midwifery by just going like, oh, I do not want to go into the system. I don't want to work in a hospital. I don't want to, and they choose this path instead. Yeah. Which I think is a superior path, to be honest.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you so much for chatting with me, Anna. Do you have like any last questions or comments or anything like that?
No, I just think that, what you're doing is amazing. So important to spread these home birth stories. To normalize home birth is so important. We do have a very small growing number, but it needs to increase, and women need to understand that actually if you are a healthy woman, you do not have really truly high risk, comorbidities like heart problems or something that truly needs you being in the hospital, then you're actually statistically better off at home. Yeah. If you want to have a natural normal birth, do not visit the hospital. Yeah. They will make you pathological. Yeah. And choose home birth.
Yeah. I think that's awesome to end on that. Choose home birth.